I would probably take an average 1-2 grinder playing his A game over an average 25-50 grinder playing his C game any day.
You're listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Each week, you'll get to peek inside the greatest minds in the game and discover what makes them successful.
Mental toughness separates those that can't handle the stress.
If you're going to treat it like an amateur, you're probably going to have amateur results.
Now here's your host, Elliot Rowe.
Hey, Elliot Rowe here. I'm very excited to announce that for the next few episodes, Stephen Baker will be guest hosting the show. Stephen has experience both as a professional poker player, strategic coach, and now a member of my mindset performance coaching world. I can confidently say that Stephen's one of the world's leading experts in poker mindset and performance, and I'm really excited to hear the conversations he has with some fantastic guests. And with that, here's Stephen.
My guest on today's podcast is Alex Assassinato Fitzgerald. Alex has been around poker a long time, and he's sustained an extremely successful career as a player, and now not just as a player, but also as a coach. We'll be sharing that journey with him and the lessons he's learned along the way. Alex also produces some amazing content in terms of video and books. And today we'll also be looking into some of the important lessons he shares with us in his latest book, The 100 Biggest Mistakes That Poker Players Make. So without further ado, let's get to it and listen to what Alex has to say. So Alex, welcome. Great to have you here. I think you're going to be pretty familiar to a lot of our audience, if not all of our audience, but all the same, I'd just like you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, because you have a really interesting journey, not quite the same as everybody else, both in terms of where you start and where your poker career has taken you from playing to still playing, but a very heavy emphasis on producing content and coaching. So perhaps you could just share your journey with us.
Sure. So, hey, everybody. My name is Alex Fitzgerald. Online, I go by the cheerful moniker of Assassinato. So before poker, when I was a teenager, I worked as a commercial fisherman. I worked at an Arby's. I moved Persian carpets. I did landscaping, and I was a security guard. My last real job was the year I graduated high school, 2006. Ever since then, I've stuck it out in this crazy game somehow. For the longest time, I was just playing to make money. I was just a professional poker player. But for many years, probably about 15 years, I've been doing a lot of private lessons. I really enjoy the private lessons. I like doing one every morning. It's really a great way to start the morning, really talking to up-and-coming professionals, getting hyped up, getting to look at the game, getting to have fun with the game, and exploring new concepts, helping them get to new frontiers. And I've been doing that for about 15 years, so I guess there's a pretty good possibility that I've done the most private lessons on earth. I've also been lucky enough to be able to publish some books and do some training packages, do training videos and whatnot. So yeah, that's been my journey, and a whole lot of poker playing. I started out with sit and goes, and then I moved into MTTs, and then I really loved playing cash for a number of years. And I've been bouncing around. One of the good parts of my job is I get to pick what I do on each day. Do I get to go play a live tournament? Do I play cash? Do I teach that day, or do I record content? I've been very lucky in life to be doing this for so many years.
Fantastic. And obviously there's many points in your career which have obviously been challenging and important. But if you could choose just one where you could say, there was a really important lesson for me to learn and one I'd share with anybody, could you just pick one point along the long road you've taken to get here, which you think is really valuable?
Ooh, so the question is, what is the most valuable lesson I've picked up along the way?
Yeah, because we're going to be sharing more from your book in a minute. But yeah, if you could choose one lesson from your own journey where you could say, well, wait a minute, I wish many people who I was trying to mentor could know that and learn that, what would it be?
Sure. So there was a time I wanted I was playing every big tournament I could. I was saving up every nickel I had. I took every dollar I had and I moved overseas to try to play as many big tournaments as possible. I was playing every big tournament I could. I was trying to play cash games at levels I didn't really have any business playing in. And I kept falling back to this one site, this one really small website that I always heard they had some deal with a sports book in a newer market, although I never really confirmed that. But every time I played on this website, even though I was still learning, I was just making money. I was just clocking checks. And that was the first time I realized, oh no, 90% of this job is table selection. Because when I was playing on this one website, it didn't matter how good of a poker player I was. It didn't matter how good of a poker player I was as long as the other 8 players or 5 players at the table were worse than I was. Because if you practice good table selection and you're playing for meaningful stakes, you will make money. And once I was able to make money consistently from this website, things started evening out. I started having more stability in my career, and that's when I was able to start taking shots without running around like a chicken with its head cut off. And I was finally able to settle down and run deep in some of these bigger live tournaments. So if I had not found that bread and butter game, if I had not said to myself 90% of my job is table selection, I wouldn't have succeeded at anything else.
Oh, that's fantastic. So that's a really valuable lesson. And by the way, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. I was in my career at one point, I remember I was quite resistant to playing any other site other than Full Tilt as it was and PokerStars because I just loved the software. But of course, there were softer games elsewhere. And once I got into the idea that those softer games were elsewhere, it became so much better. Forget about that little bit of friction with the software. Just go where the money is. And that's a really valuable lesson, right?
It's so funny you said that because the site I was playing on, I would misclick fold sets all the time. The time banks always ran out. I was constantly screaming at the screen because the software was so bad. But you're right, the professionals didn't want to play on that site because it was so difficult to play multiple tables. It was so hard to incorporate into your routine. And so I ended up just getting to play with many people that didn't normally play poker. And you're right, that's what led to me being able to do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this is one for the kids. Back in the day when Card Runners was the training site, one of the guys there did a hand history review for somebody. It was like a recording of a session and he was watching the software and he basically said, if I had to play on this site, I'd give up poker. And the site he was talking about was part of the iPoker network, which was like the third biggest, I think it was about the third biggest network at the time. It was like, you know, I'm not playing on this.
And that wasn't the softest site either. Yeah. That was no, I remember I played a lot on iPoker. Yeah. That was a big network.
Yeah. But, no, I mean, you're right. And as I say, I have to hold my hands up and say there was definitely resistance. I mean, nothing was as beautiful as the software on the late and lamented Full Tilt and the still existing PokerStars. But it's not necessarily where the value's at. So, yeah, really great lesson, Alex. Let's get into more lessons because you've written a number of books. The latest is 100 Biggest Mistakes that Poker Players Make. And I wanted to just take everybody who's listening and watching through some of the points you make in that book. And what I really like about your teaching style, and I'm somebody who's actually back in the day had lessons from you, is you're very good at seeing the big picture and conveying that. And this book is a real example of that. And there's plenty of technical material in there, but because we're the Mindset Advantage podcast, we're more concerned with the intangibles, the mental side of the game. And I wanted to start in that light with a really important discussion you have right near the beginning of the book, which is you raise the question, why is somebody wanting to become a pro? I've got clients I've got lots of professional poker clients. I've also got a number of clients who take poker very seriously, but they've got good jobs and they have an aspiration to become a professional. And I'd be really interested for you to share your thoughts and advice about that, because it's something upon which I've got a number of opinions, which I think coincide with yours, but I really wanted to hear it from you.
Sure. So something that I talk about with my clients all the time is they say many of them aspire to be professionals. And I tell them, you might not want to be a professional. You might want to take a leave of absence from your work for a few months and try to do this, because you might find it. They say the fastest way to hate your hobby is to make it a career. And that's really true of anything. Just because of how much you expose yourself to something, it's going to become harder and harder for it to seem new and interesting every day unless you consciously work at it. And people say things to me all the time like, well, isn't it nice that you don't have a boss? And I say to them, I have many bosses. They're called health insurance, groceries, car payment, rent, tax prep. There's 100 things that poker players have to pay for that a lot of people don't realize. So your health insurance might be taken care of by your employer, but that's something I have to pay for myself. And my health insurance provider recently left the state I lived in, so I had to switch out, and that took out time. Your taxes sometimes are taken care of by your employer, and it's just taken from your paycheck. You file a few things at the beginning when you start working for the employer, and then it's pretty seamless from that point on. If you're a professional gambler, that's you really have to have your ducks in a row if you're going to be filing your taxes that way. So that ends up taking a time. That takes a day out of my work year every year to file all of those taxes. So there's a lot of things you don't realize actually come with the job. And I tell people, listen, yeah, technically I don't have a job, but if I can take off as much time as I want, but at some point those bills are going to come calling again. And if I'm not prepared, I got to explain to everybody I love that, yeah, I took this many days off this month and now I can't pay this bill or I can't pay that bill or whatnot. At the tippity top of poker, obviously you're playing in such high pressure environments. It's actually a really smart decision to pay to take as much downtime as possible, just so you're very fresh for those high pressure environments. But if you're a normal poker player, most normal poker players, most grinded out professionals, you have to put in a lot of hours. There's a lot of tedium is what I would put it. And don't forget, you're working nights and weekends. You're working the times that a lot of people actually would like to have off with their family. You're constantly putting in hours late at night. Your sleep schedule can be a little bit messed up. And what you end up having to do is live this life that is not perfect for everyone. Some people really enjoy it. I've enjoyed it quite a bit, but it's not something that a lot of people aspire to. If they could feel it for a few months, they go, wow, this is actually pretty tough. And I liked it when I worked for my employer, and they were actually taking care of a lot of things that I didn't realize they were taking care of. The other thing is, when you're a professional poker player, let's say you're running bad, that's a 24/7 job, because now even when you're off the felt, you're thinking about it. Even when you're out with your family, you're thinking about it. You're thinking, if I don't turn this around, things are going to be really poor. Versus when you have an employer, it's kind of their responsibility to right the ship as far as the company. So you could go in, do your work, and leave. Now, all of that is to say, I know a lot of my clients that have decided to stick with their job actually play some excellent poker because they don't have the pressure of having to pay for their groceries at the end of the day if a particular tournament or a particular cash game session doesn't work out. And that is a huge asset. You want to have that kind of flexibility when you're at the table.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. I mean, I I transitioned. I suppose I'd been in self-employed really all of my adult life. Basically, I was employed for 2 years, and then I became self-employed. And so to that extent, I was used to the disciplines and to some extent the variance of being in business. But I can tell everybody who's watching, who's thinking of transitioning to becoming a pro, it is a shock. Having felt no pressure at all at the poker tables, really, when I was playing recreationally, to all of a sudden, wait a minute, these results matter. This is what pays the rent. This is what puts the food on the table. That is a real factor. And of course, like the work I do with clients is around helping their mind consciously and subconsciously accept that reality. But it takes a lot of work, and it's not easy because not everybody is in the position of being a nosebleeds player who's already got a huge amount of money in the bank. A lot of, the average pro, it is something where results on a month-to-month basis do matter. And that is a pressure. And you're right. One advantage I think a well-paid recreational player has in a tournament, they don't have many, let's be fair, but if they're well-trained, they can take a good game, but they can relieve themselves of the pressure that those pros for whom the results really matter, they're feeling it. And that is an actual advantage that can become an edge. So that's really important. I think I just want to add to something else that, sometimes I think people make the transition and they feel like I want this life of freedom. And even the guys who've made it to the top, you're right. They get to the tippity top and they have a certain amount of freedom and they can start to pick and choose, but they had to pay their dues almost always to get there. There's relatively few stories of truly overnight successes. And I have to say that, like, some of my clients who are in that category, they're the most disciplined people I know. They are extremely disciplined about their schedules. And occasionally I'll hear somebody say, I didn't get into poker to have a schedule. Well, guess what? It's a reality. You are very, very fortunate if you can reach the point in your life where a schedule is something you can dismiss. And the truth of the matter is, and this is the same in a lot of professional sports, isn't it? We see the tip of the iceberg when they perform, and we see the tip of the iceberg in their lifestyle. But underneath, there's this huge amount of discipline, structure, organization, which has led to those people being in that position of privilege. They've earned the privilege through discipline and hard work, right?
Absolutely. One thing I was going to add was I actually did live that life of having no schedule for a while when I was really young. And the thing was, I wasn't maximizing my profits either because I would just play when I felt like it. And sometimes I would just burn myself out before a Sunday. So the big meaningful tournaments would come around. And because I wasn't taking care of myself, I wasn't prepared for the big meaningful moments because I was just flying by the seat of my pants. And I always slept irregular hours and I always ate irregularly. And I just felt weird a lot of the time. And once I actually did decide, hey, this is my job, I should take this seriously, and just started treating it like a profession, that's when the results really came. So sorry, off you go. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's really important. By the way, okay, there's a sort of almost, there's a scale here. And I think most people who are listening to this podcast will have the idea that being a professional, the word professional means something, and there's a certain amount of discipline involved in that. But I think it can be an eye-opener as to just how disciplined the best are. And then you'll get the person who says, okay, but I want to get there fast and I want to take some shortcuts. And a lot of people I work with, because I work using flow psychology, they're very interested in the idea. But what they're seeing it as sometimes, or I think certainly a lot of people can see it this way, is almost a shortcut. But the truth of the matter is, to achieve a flow state on a consistent basis, there is a lot of discipline in that lifestyle. But interestingly, part of that discipline is around recovery. Looking after your sleep, looking after your exercise. These things are very important because your brain will regenerate dopamine, which is really important for the sense of motivation. and focus, those neurochemicals, dopamine, norepinephrine, are present in a flow state. So these things don't happen by accident. They happen through structure. And one thing that a regular job does give you, it kind of imposes a structure on us, right? The boss says you've got to be in the office at 9 and you can go home at 5:30. You've got to impose that yourself. And if you don't, then I'm sorry to tell people, it won't really happen. You won't get good results by accident. Talent will get you so far, but it won't get you all the way. It certainly won't sustain consistent results in poker. And I can definitely say that, in my view, even the people you may look at in envy at their lifestyle, they've got a lot of discipline. It's with very, very few exceptions, I would suggest. Would you agree, knowing the people you've come across in poker?
Absolutely. That's so true. Everyone I know, I'm thinking of one of my friends right now who's 10 times the poker player I'll ever be and has made a considerable amount of money from this game, just millions and millions. And he is just very disciplined as far as everything, sleep, diet, exercise, all of that. And I've definitely noticed, especially as I'm now heading into my late 30s, I used to be able to sleep 6-7 hours and just wake up and I was fine. The more you age too, the more important this is. Half of my job is just working to get into that flow state. It's, okay, I got to get to bed at this hour. I got to sleep 8-9 hours, whatever it is. Okay, don't eat this in the morning because that'll make you sluggish. Okay, have this coffee. Don't put sugar in it because that's going to give you the spike and then you're going to crash. Okay, do these workouts because that actually leaves you feeling energized the rest of the day. Don't burn out because then you're going to crap out in 4 hours. It's such a laundry list that when I think about it, now that we're talking about it, the younger me wouldn't even believe that you have to do all of this to play good poker. But when you start knowing what your A game feels like, it is so awful when you show up at the table and go, nope, it's going to be a B game today because I messed up X, Y, and Z.
Absolutely. And this leads us neatly into one of the chapters in your book, not investing in the intangibles. And I'd just like you to maybe just talk a little bit more to that. To some extent, we're already on topic. But what are the big intangibles that have made a difference to you now you've had this experience of working out what works for you and what really doesn't?
So that's an excellent question. So when I play, I try very hard to find tables where I am the best player just because the other players are recreational in nature. But it's going to happen where, especially if you play tournament poker, you will sit down at poker tables where there are good poker players or just even better poker players than you. And then usually what's going to separate you two is the intangibles. It's going to be who slept better. It's going to be who prepared better. So say you're playing the main event at the series. If you're playing the main event at the series, there's going to be a lot of players that know what they're doing. So what it's going to come down to, I had a table during the main event this year. I was lucky enough to cash the main event. Unfortunately, I didn't get to do much more after that. But I had a table where everybody at the table was just lights out. I had never seen these players before, but they were just excellent. They were applying pressure in all the right places. They were really tough to deal with. And I decided, okay, today I'm going to have to play more patient than I've ever played. If you sleep poorly the day before one of those days, or you ate something really heavy and now you're dragging, it is so much harder to wait in those situations. And I had one spot at the beginning of that day where I could have opened a weaker hand from early position, which normally I can get away with, but because I was present, because I had gotten sleep the night before, I went, oh no, I can't open this at this table because I'm going to get 3-bet too much and these players are too good. I folded. If I had played that hand, I would have lost more than half my chips because it turned out I would have made a huge hand and somebody else would have made a much bigger hand. And they're not the type of players I would have been able to fold to. And there was also another situation I was able to wait for that actually saw me making a bunch of chips. And that was all because I had taken care of the smaller things the day before. I was sitting straight up in my chair so my back didn't hurt after a certain number of hours. I had slept well. I had eaten before I showed up at the table. I wasn't burning myself out on mediocre pots that normally I could play certain hands, but obviously I couldn't play that day. I wasn't trying to beat people that were better than me. I had the humility to recognize I can't take this spot, that spot, this spot. And it was just all these little things adding up that led to me getting off of that table with some chips and then thankfully making a run that allowed me to make some money.
Absolutely. I mean, this happens in so many competitive endeavors. I mean, Tiger Woods changed golf, right? You know, before that, I don't think many people truly saw it as an athletic sport, but he took, you know, what was for some, I mean, Gary Player, some going back in the day, something like Gary Player did take his fitness seriously, but really Tiger Woods established a new benchmark. If you wanted to seriously compete, you know, it's hard to have his talent, but you had to at least match his work rate, his dedication to keeping himself as fit as he did. These intangibles make a difference. In professional cycling, there was a team, they've changed their name now, but called Team Sky. And when they came into the sport, they just focused on marginal gains. They had very talented guys, but they would go round to the hotels on the Tour de France and they'd take their own mattresses and put them on the beds. Everything would be thought about, every bit of nutrition.
Wow.
You know, it was these marginal gains. Now, I guess some people might be listening and thinking, well, yeah, but really what matters is playing your hands well. The truth of the matter is there's a lot of resources there now, more than ever, isn't there, to become a pretty damn good poker player. There's a huge amount of information out there. And you can practice and you can get to a pretty good level, but it's no good if you're playing nowhere near your level as a result of getting all these intangibles wrong. You know, it's no good having a game which is in theory 90 out of 100 if in fact you're getting the intangibles wrong and you're bringing a game which really caps your game at 50 out of 100 for that day. And people kind of ignore this stuff, and getting good sleep, getting your nutrition right, exercise contributes to a feeling, not just a feeling of wellness, but higher brain function. These things are really important. So I love that chapter in your book because it is important. There's a huge amount of technical material in there. But focusing on these intangibles is so important. Coming to the technical material, although we're not going to discuss technical concepts as such, I really enjoyed your chapter on, I think there was 2 chapters if I recall. There's one on not studying the right way and not practicing deliberately. And I'd really like you to talk about those things because, again, it's something I'm very big on when I'm dealing with my clients who are in poker. Just share your thoughts, if you will, Alex, on the right way to study and what good deliberate practice looks like.
Sure. So what you don't want to do is what I did when I was younger, where I played hundreds of thousands, if not a million hands, where I just didn't get better because there were times in my career I needed to get a paycheck. So instead of working, this is another problem when you're playing poker for money, is oftentimes you don't get to play creatively. You don't get to try out new ideas. You just find a game and play the same style again and again and again if that's making you money. And I was consistently playing and just not getting better because I wasn't challenging myself. A lot of people think if they just play poker, they're going to get better. But if you keep... how many of us have sat down at a live game and there's a guy who's been playing his entire life and he still limps 9-3 suited from the button? Just because you're playing quite a bit doesn't mean you're naturally getting better. And people say, oh, 10,000 hours of practice, that's what's going to lead to mastery. Well, every time you drive, many of those people have driven for 10,000 hours and some of them can't operate a blinker. So you have to have a goal every time you sit down as to what you're trying to do better. So the way I typically do this is I will look through a database and I will look for a set of numbers that just look really off. So let's say your river calls are just, you're losing a bunch of money when you call on the rivers. Now, sometimes you're getting a great pot odds price on the river, so you're more or less forced into a call, and that's fine. But you pour through the hands and you keep seeing, oh my God, I don't even know what I was thinking on these hands. There's no missed draws this guy could have. This guy wasn't a creative player. This person is not the type to triple barrel bluff. Why was I calling down here with all these bluff catchers? Well, this is a simple fix. The next time you play, just every time you have a bluff catcher on the river, just practice folding. Now, that's not the perfect way to play poker, but you're going to play thousands and thousands of sessions in your life. If you experiment for one session and it dramatically opens up your game, it's worth whatever the results were of that individual session. So let's say every time you have a bluff catcher, you fold on the river for just one session. And then you realize, wow, this session actually went a little bit better. I didn't make a ton of money, but I also wasn't going up and down consistently. Well, that's going to teach you for the rest of your life, okay, if I'm on the fence and I can't put someone on a missed draw and I don't really think they're creative enough to triple barrel bluff, maybe I should fold more in these situations. So that one session, you might have learned more than you learned in the last 2 or 3 months, and you just keep systematically going through that. It's really good if you can get a coach. Oftentimes coaches can tell you, and there's a lot of great coaches working in the industry today, if you can just ask them, what is the biggest thing I need to work on based on what you're seeing in my hand histories or my database? What could give me the biggest result? If you could give me a list of 5 or 10 of those, and then just every time you play, pick one of them and go, this is the one thing I'm going to work on today. And until you feel like you've mastered that list of 5 or 10, do not move on to another list of 5 or 10.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I'm so glad you said that, because that is one thing I say to all of my clients. I see it so often. People want to study the entire syllabus in poker, but the truth of the matter is there may be parts of the game tree where they're pretty good already, and they go out and buy a course. And there is, let's say their pre-flop game is pretty good. There is no point in them spending 6 hours going through that new course on pre-flop. I'm not saying they'll get no value, but the marginal gain they will get from that will be nothing compared to, say, if they're not very good out of position as the pre-flop raiser. They need to go straight to that, and they need to look at that course and another course and another course, and maybe look through some solutions, get some coaching, and improve their biggest leak, rather than spreading their thoughts all around the game tree. I love your section on deliberate practice, because there's a huge amount of research to back what you're saying. I mean, Angela Duckworth, probably, I think she's one of my favorite, and I think she's one of the most preeminent behavioral psychologists. She wrote Grit, and she has a chapter in her book about effectively deliberate practice and how it is the difference maker between people who succeed and people who don't. And she gives many examples, from adult examples to children in the National Spelling Bee, who basically, those who practice words which they don't already know, they seek them out and they find those, do much better than those who stick with words they do. It seems kind of obvious, but that is an example of taking yourself into an area which is outside your comfort zone, learning something new and becoming better. The other thing I really agree is, I agree with the role of a coach. I mean, even if you have coaching once a quarter, somebody looks at your database and says, hey, this is the biggest thing that will improve your game. That is so valuable and give you that one thing to work on. The trouble is, we don't know what we don't know, right? We can look at our own database. We can look at our own hand histories, and we simply may not spot our own leaks, because sometimes, not always, but sometimes we don't even know it's a leak. So that's really valuable. And the other thing I just wanted to add to this is there's a huge amount of study on skill acquisition and skill retention. And it's been found that a flow trigger is immediate feedback. And some of this research on skill acquisition and skill retention was really interesting, because they did a study of various professions to find out who had the highest level of skill acquisition and skill retention. It was found that surgeons had that. And then the question becomes, well, why? Why, for example, surgeons rather than other members of the medical profession? And the answer was immediate feedback. And Of course, the feedback for a surgeon is pretty tough. If you get it wrong, somebody suffers on the operating table. But it keeps you alive in your sort of mental state. You are very much aware of the importance of producing something at a high level. I think for a lot of people, poker study, it can feel comforting, but too comfortable. So you can watch a video and think, there you go, that's good, I watched that. Watch it like a movie, and I kind of feel good. I probably learned something. I put in an hour, maybe 2 hours, that's great. But the process I encourage clients to do is either with a coach or with a study partner. And I know you can't afford necessarily to have a coach for every time you study, but is to do something, study a particular topic, having identified it the way we've just discussed, and try to create a usable in-game thought process, maybe a flow chart to say, how am I going to think about this spot in the game? And then present it to a study partner at the end of the day and get some feedback. Let somebody challenge your assumptions. Am I thinking about this spot in the right way? Look at these hands. This is the way I'd analyze them. Do you agree? And that is a far more deliberate way of learning. You've got the advantage that you actually do this with students. Naturally, teaching is learning. It's a great way of actually, expressing your thoughts. You have to consolidate your thoughts and express them in a usable way for your students. That's something I would advise every poker player to be able to do. If you can't explain the concept, it probably means you don't really understand it. And I think if you can make that part of your process every study session, and I've got clients working with each other, and at the end of the day, they'll have studied and they meet and they say, here's my thoughts, shoot them down. I want you to attack what my thinking on this is. What do you think of that as a process, Alex?
I think that's an excellent process. And definitely one of the things I enjoy about my job quite a bit is these up-and-coming pros who are super sharp. What's that phrase? In the beginner's mind, there's many possibilities. In the master's mind, there's few. They'll ask questions where you go, wow, why has nobody asked that question? And it really helps, because if they bring up a question you haven't thought about when it comes to your concept, that could be a massive leak you didn't see, or a way somebody could play back at your play. But I completely agree that this is the way to help people. One of the things I do when I phrase, or when I create my training packages, is I put everything in the form of a quiz. So I will show someone a situation. I'll give them a timer, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds if it's a really tough question. And then you have to come up with your answer. And then I will immediately shoot it down, or I will say, this is correct, but did you realize why it's correct? Did you see A, B, and C here? And by doing that, tons of repetition, tons of hands, tons of questions, tons of quizzes, you get your reaction time down and you start seeing the subtle details faster and faster and faster, which allows you to condense everything at the table in a much more rapid fashion. So the problem a lot of people have when they're at the poker table is they're creating their strategies all the time. So they're wearing themselves out. And versus if you're at the table and you know, okay, in this situation, A, B, and C are the most important thoughts that I have to engage in. And once I see these things, usually this is the answer, but maybe I need to look and see if there's anything off that I didn't notice that might change this, the stack size, or maybe this person is tilting or whatever it is. Being able to condense things into the most usable fashion will really help you at the table, but that takes practice. It takes tons of practice. And this is what I don't like about hand history reviews is hand history reviews, they have their place. A lot of the time you will review a hand history and you will just go, okay, do you think this was good? Do you think that was good? And if neither of you find the point that needed to be discussed, that means you're not going to get as much from that as you would like. So it's much better, in my opinion, to have a pro consciously test you to go, okay, what do you think of this? Okay, 10 seconds. Did you see what you were supposed to see? Okay, I think you missed this. Be careful, because most of your decisions you're going to make 5 to 10 seconds at the table. Okay, let's try again. See if you see it this time, 5 to 10 seconds. Okay, you saw it this time. Good. Did you see this other thing? And so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And this is the value of this sort of heuristic-based approach. I mean, a heuristic is obviously a simplification by design and by definition. But being able to say, look, the essence of this kind of situation is A, B, and C will help you. Whereas the alternative is, well, what you're going to try and do is in the moment, as you say, create a strategy based on 10 videos you watched, 200 hands you reviewed, 20 solver outputs you got. And you're trying to meld all of that together in a matter of seconds to create something meaningful. And that is not going to happen. Let's be honest. Your brain is going to be forced to simplify all of that in the moment, but it's probably not going to simplify it as well compared to if you've been deliberate about it and done that thinking away from the tables. What I really like, by the way, about your video content where you use the question and answer approach is you might say, well, that's learning by doing, which it is. And people might say, well, I can do that just by playing, except what you then go on to do is say, and I sometimes ask questions, well, okay, you said that, but why? You gave the right answer, but why did you give the right answer? Do you know why it was the right answer? Or do you know why that's the wrong answer? And that approach is great. I love it. So now, this is the Mindset Advantage podcast, and humans are emotional, and there's two really important sections in your book, which I really think are clearly related. You talk about getting emotional when you play and also not valuing mental training. Firstly, just really welcome your thoughts on those two issues and how they should be considered by players, people looking to upgrade their game.
So the first thing to recognize is there's no such thing as a human without emotions. So you can't just hate on yourself for having emotions. I think there was a particular case where they say something like 80 to 95% of our decisions are made with emotions. And there was a particular case where some poor guy had a head injury, and they noticed that the part of his brain that was impacted the most was his emotional center. So doctors had these questions. Oh, is this person going to become a cold calculating machine, perhaps a master of finance? The poor guy would spend 3 hours in the morning trying to pick a breakfast cereal because it turns out we use our emotions to make most of our decisions. It's actually not our intellectual center that makes a lot of decisions for us. So we have to recognize that a lot of the times we are using our emotions to make decisions, and oftentimes we're not rational beings, we're rationalizing beings. We feel our way into a decision and then we rationalize it later. Now, if you're doing a ton of prep before you get to the table, a lot of the times your gut instinct will lead you the right way. But if you're not doing that prep work before you show up, your gut instinct could just be overridden by hunger or tiredness or tilt or whatever it is. And that's what's really going to mess you up. So the way that I find the best way to manage your emotions is to see your brain as a science experiment. So we seem to think that we have certain thoughts that creates the emotion, and then maybe we can just think our way out of it. That's not really true in my experience. Your diet, sleep, and exercise, if you are minding that, it's going to create more positive emotions, and that's going to create better tilt control. So as long as you manage the intangibles before you get to the table, you're going to find yourself in a less reactive state. You're going to find yourself in a much more calm state, and you're going to be able to execute from that point forward, versus if you're playing higher than you should be playing, if you didn't sleep as well, if you ate something heavy that's causing you some issues, all of that could cause you to tilt. And it's really just a matter of not looking at all of the details before you sat down at the felt.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I agree with absolutely everything you say there. I mean, and again, you can prove exactly what you've said, not just as outcomes, but in terms of the mechanisms. I mean, in a flow state, dopamine and norepinephrine are driven to your brain. One of the things that happens in a flow state, interestingly, is the prefrontal cortex is actually downgraded a little. That part of our brain is associated with slow logical decision making, interestingly, but because you've done good work away from the table, you are able to access your knowledge through the kind of preparation we've talked of before. And norepinephrine and dopamine will drive focus, concentration, and you won't have as many emotions. But to get those neurochemicals there into your brain in a flow state, you have to have slept well. You have to have prepared yourself. All of these intangibles come back into play. The other interesting thing is, I think it is really important to be aware of our emotions. And I think it's definitely true to say self-awareness is a really good starting point here. Where I think a lot of traditional mindset thinking in poker needs to go further is a recognition of exactly what you've said, that injecting logic and saying, okay, my thought in a game sometimes is illogical, is helpful for sure. But logic isn't always at the forefront of our responses in those moments. Those immediate subconscious emotional reactions are so powerful that they effectively bypass the logic. And that's why, the likes of the work that I do, Elliot Rowe does with hypnotherapy, which is a specifically subconscious modality of psychological work, is really important, because there's no point appealing to the logic of the conscious mind when it simply doesn't even get a chance to get its jacket on by the time the subconscious has already made the decision. You have to basically align your subconscious mind with what your conscious intentions are. But being really intentional, and this comes back to the technical point, being really intentional about how you are going to play certain spots has to be there. This idea of I can trust my gut is true, but it's only true if it comes from a place of deep knowledge. I know you're a big reader, Alex. I know I read a lot of your emails, and you've often read a book, or I listen to it. I know you're a big Nassim Taleb fan, and I suspect you've probably read Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. And there's this great section, because Kahneman's basic thesis is we can't as humans trust our instincts because they're not as reliable as we think. We are full of cognitive biases. But he has this great discussion with another psychologist who did a lot of studies on firemen, and he talked about, well, is there a sort of deep place of deep knowledge? Can you trust instinct? He gave the example of a fireman who was in this burning house, and without being able to rationalize it, he said, we need to leave this building now. And seconds later, the building collapsed. And that came from a place of deep knowledge. It was his instinct. It was his instinct, but that instinct wasn't just some mumbo jumbo sort of feeling that came from nowhere. It was years of experience and knowledge integrated. That's what happens in a flow state. Effectively, you can trust your feelings, but those feelings aren't magical. They come out of a lot of deliberate practice to integrate it, and then you can trust yourself in those moments, and then your heuristics, you can kind of add on the detail to actually really get yourself to the place you want. But you're absolutely right. To arrive at all of that, you've also got to arrive at the tables in a pretty good emotional state, and that's going to be looking after yourself in the way you've advised. So, to everybody listening and watching, Alex's book is a fantastic, holistic treatise on how to think about poker on a technical level, but also a lot of the surrounding structures, which will actually enable you to bring all of that technical knowledge to bear. With all of that said, Alex, I'd just like you to finish by maybe sharing with us what your vision and goals on a personal level are for the future. Where are you going to take your career now and your life?
Oh, that's a big question. So I'm going to keep, I really do enjoy the coaching. There's a lot of times I do a lesson and I'll go, that was pretty fun. And I'm very lucky to just be talking to all these up and coming pros, because it keeps me sharp. And just talking to all the different people I get to talk to through my work is fascinating too, because you really get to meet everybody from all around the world. And so I think I'm going to keep doing a lot of private coaching. I think I'm going to keep doing a lot of training packages because those are really fun to put together. It helps me stay sharp too, just to organize my thoughts. And I'm going to keep a couple of times a week getting out to these live tournaments or getting to play these Sunday sessions or getting to play a cash session. And my great hope is to win a larger live event at some point. I can't play as many of them as I used to just because I split my time between different endeavors now. But at the same time, I feel so much more relaxed at the table when I play just because I have my life more in order with what I do now with coaching and also just having my routines down. I guess if you do anything for long enough, you should know what works for you at a certain point. And fortunately, I've gotten to the point I know what works for me. So definitely when I play, I'm feeling really good. I really get a lot out of those deep runs. I very much enjoy my job when I have those deep runs. It took me 10 years to start feeling what we were discussing, that those gut instincts that I could really trust, but it really hits me like a ton of bricks now sometimes when I'm playing. Don't call this bet. If you call this bet, things are going to go really poorly. Or, okay, this value bet looks super thin and crazy, but I think he's ready to go. I think he's ready to leave this table. And it's actually just super enjoyable to be in that flow state when I do get to go there. So I'm really hoping to be able to play more and hopefully just get to experience a lot more of these deep runs and hopefully turn some of those into real big finishes that I can be proud of.
Oh, well, I hope all of that becomes true for you, Alex, because you've shared so much with the poker community. I personally have benefited from your lessons, both specific one-to-one coaching, but also reading and consuming your material. I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much for giving so generously of your time today. And everybody, please do look in the show notes. There's links to Alex's website and also for the book. So thank you again, Alex, and best of luck.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So many thanks to Alex for sharing his time and thoughts with us. And thank you for listening in and watching this latest edition of the Mindset Advantage podcast. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks again. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. To get future episodes delivered to you automatically, make sure to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting service. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.